Something went terribly wrong in Shanghai. Not just during the race, but with the future of Formula One itself. Because the Chinese Grand Prix was only the second race of the 2026 season, and already the new FIA regulations are creating chaos across the grid. Max Verstappen retired. Fernando Alonso retired. 2 McLaren cars did not even start the race. And while teams were trying to understand what just happened, drivers began quietly questioning the new rules that were supposed to make Formula One better. These cars are faster, more complex, and far more dependent on electrical systems than ever before. One failure, and the race is over. Exactly what happened to Verstappen when his energy recovery system suddenly collapsed during the Grand Prix. Meanwhile, one team looked completely comfortable. Mercedes. A dominant 1-2 finish. A car that looked stable while others struggled just to survive the race. Which raises a dangerous question inside the paddock. Did the FIA create a system so complicated that only a few teams truly understand it? Because if that is true, the entire competitive balance of Formula One could be about to explode. Drivers are frustrated. Engineers are worried. And after the chaos in China, the governing body may already be under pressure. But there is one detail from the Chinese Grand Prix that almost nobody noticed. A detail that could explain why Verstappen was furious, and why the new rules might be far more controversial than the FIA expected. And once you see it, the whole situation suddenly makes a lot more sense. Before we break it all down, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this 2026 season is already turning into one of the most unpredictable starts Formula One has seen in years. Right after the Chinese Grand Prix ended, the mood inside the paddock felt very different. Not calm. Not celebratory. Uneasy. Because what happened in Shanghai was supposed to prove that the new era of Formula One was working. Instead, it raised serious doubts. This season introduced the biggest technical reset the sport has seen in years. Completely new cars, a new hybrid philosophy, and one of the most controversial changes the FIA has ever introduced: the removal of DRS. For more than a decade, DRS had been the main overtaking tool in Formula One. Simple, predictable. Drivers pressed a button, the rear wing opened, and the car gained speed on the straight. But in 2026, that system disappeared. In its place came something far more complicated: active aerodynamics. Instead of a single overtaking flap, both the front wing and rear wing now change configuration during the lap. On the straights the car switches to low drag mode, reducing air resistance and increasing top speed. In the corners the wings close again, generating maximum downforce. On paper, it sounded revolutionary. Engineers loved the idea. The FIA believed it would create smarter racing. Cars that could follow each other more closely. Longer battles. Less dependence on artificial overtaking tools. But the Chinese Grand Prix exposed the hidden problem behind this concept. The system works perfectly only when every element of the car is in perfect balance. The aerodynamics, the hybrid system, the cooling, the electronics controlling all of it. If even one of those elements fails, everything collapses. That is exactly what happened to several teams in Shanghai. Max Verstappen retired after a failure in the energy recovery system, one of the most critical components of the new hybrid architecture. Without that electrical boost, the car simply cannot perform. Fernando Alonso was forced to retire as well, after severe vibrations made the Aston Martin impossible to drive safely. And McLaren suffered one of the most shocking moments of the weekend. Both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri failed to start the race because of electrical power unit problems. 2 cars out before the race even began. For a top team, that is almost unheard of. Suddenly the paddock began asking a question nobody expected this early in the season. Are these new cars simply too complicated? Because the 2026 machines depend heavily on the interaction between multiple systems. Aerodynamic mode switching, energy deployment, battery recovery, cooling cycles, all happening simultaneously. And drivers must manage all of it while racing at more than 300 kilometers per hour. That changes the way Formula One drivers approach every lap. They are not just attacking corners anymore. They are constantly thinking about energy. About when the car switches aerodynamic modes. About how the battery is deploying power. And about whether the systems will even survive the race distance. For drivers who grew up in a more mechanical era of racing, this adjustment is massive. Some drivers have adapted quickly. Others are clearly still fighting their own machines. And nowhere was that contrast more obvious than when you compared 2 teams in Shanghai. Mercedes looked calm, controlled, stable. Red Bull looked tense, uncertain. And that contrast may explain why the next part of this story is starting to make the FIA very uncomfortable. But the real reason tensions are rising after the Chinese Grand Prix has less to do with the retirements, and more to do with the contrast everyone in the paddock noticed. Because while several teams were struggling just to finish the race, one team looked completely comfortable. Mercedes. Not just fast. Comfortable. Their car looked stable in every phase of the race. Through slow corners. Through high-speed sections. And most importantly, during the aerodynamic transitions that are causing headaches for other teams. That detail matters more than most fans realize. Because the hardest part of the new regulations is not outright speed. It is integration. The way the hybrid system works with the aerodynamics. The way the car changes between low drag mode and high downforce mode. The way the energy deployment interacts with the chassis balance. If even one of those elements is slightly off, the driver immediately feels it. The rear of the car becomes unstable. The front loses precision. And suddenly the driver is fighting the car instead of racing the competitors. But the Mercedes in Shanghai looked completely composed. Smooth through the corners. Efficient on the straights. Consistent during long stints. That level of stability is incredibly powerful in a race. It allows the drivers to push harder, to manage the tires better, and to control the pace instead of reacting to problems. Which is exactly what Andrea Kimi Antonelli did on his way to the first victory of his Formula One career, leading a historic 1-2 finish for Mercedes ahead of George Russell. For the Silver Arrows, it was the perfect start to the new era. But for the rest of the grid, it was something else. A warning. Because whenever Formula One introduces a completely new rulebook, one question always appears sooner or later. Did one team understand the rules better than everyone else? If the answer is yes, the consequences can shape the entire season. And that possibility is already worrying several teams. Because the new regulations reward something very specific. Efficiency. A car that produces strong downforce in corners but minimal drag on the straights. A car that manages hybrid energy perfectly. A car that remains stable while switching aerodynamic modes multiple times per lap. Those requirements sound simple. But in reality, they are incredibly difficult to achieve at the same time. Every design decision affects something else. More downforce increases drag. Less drag reduces corner stability. More electrical deployment increases heat. More cooling increases aerodynamic resistance. Engineers are constantly balancing these trade-offs. Which is why the first races of a new regulation era are always chaotic. Teams are still learning. Still discovering weaknesses in their designs. Still trying to understand where the real performance lies. And China exposed exactly that. Some teams seem lost. Others are fighting reliability problems. And one team looks like it might already have the answer. If that situation continues, the pressure inside the paddock will grow very quickly. Because teams that feel disadvantaged by a new rulebook rarely stay quiet. They start asking questions. Requesting technical clarifications. Looking for interpretations of the rules that could level the playing field. That process can quickly turn political. Team principals begin pushing the FIA for explanations. Engineers search for loopholes. And drivers start speaking more openly about the problems they experience on track. We have seen this pattern many times in Formula One history. Whenever a regulation change creates a clear early winner, the debate about fairness begins almost immediately. And the Chinese Grand Prix may have been the first spark of that debate. Because while Mercedes celebrated one of the most impressive performances of the young season, Max Verstappen was walking away from a retirement. Red Bull was suddenly facing reliability concerns. And several teams were quietly wondering if they were already chasing a concept they did not fully understand. But the most interesting part of this entire situation is something most people have not realized yet. Because the biggest challenge of the 2026 regulations might not be aerodynamics. And it might not even be the hybrid system. It might be something much more subtle. Something hidden inside the way these new cars behave over an entire race distance. And once teams begin discovering that weakness, the entire championship could change direction very quickly. But the most dangerous consequence of what we saw in China may not appear immediately. It may appear over the next few races. Because the biggest challenge of the 2026 regulations is not simply speed. It is durability. These cars are incredibly complex machines. Active aerodynamics constantly changing the airflow. Hybrid systems delivering huge amounts of electrical power. Battery recovery systems working at maximum capacity every lap. All of it operating under extreme temperatures and pressure. That combination creates a very fragile balance. If the balance holds, the car is fast. Very fast. But if something goes wrong, the failure can be immediate. That is exactly what we saw in Shanghai. Max Verstappen's race ended because the energy recovery system failed. And under the new rules, that system is no longer just an extra performance tool. It is essential to the car's entire performance structure. Without the electrical energy deployment, the power unit cannot deliver the same level of acceleration. The car loses speed on the straights. Energy recovery becomes inconsistent. And within a few laps, the race is effectively over. For Red Bull, that failure was more than just a retirement. It was a warning. Because reliability problems at the beginning of a regulation cycle can be extremely dangerous. If a team must spend development time fixing reliability, they lose valuable time improving performance. And that could change the balance of the championship. Mercedes, meanwhile, may not have that problem. Their car looked incredibly stable throughout the Chinese Grand Prix. Smooth energy deployment. Stable aerodynamic transitions. Strong tire management. All signs that their concept might already be well understood. And if that is true, they will be free to focus on performance upgrades much earlier than their rivals. But the pressure is not only technical. It is psychological. Drivers can feel when a car is fragile. They sense it through the steering wheel, through vibrations, through the way the car reacts to bumps and braking zones. And when a driver begins to doubt the reliability of the machine beneath them, their confidence changes. They drive differently. They become more cautious. They push less aggressively. That psychological effect can be just as damaging as a mechanical failure. And for a driver like Max Verstappen, that situation is particularly frustrating. Throughout his career, he has thrived in cars that allow him to attack every lap. Cars that feel stable and predictable. Cars that respond instantly to aggressive driving.